I'm sorry for the English speaker. I should have said this in English. I was introducing Father Bucur and Mr. Vidrașcu, and I was saying that Mr. Vidrașcu is the son of the godfather, the person who baptized Father Steinhardt. So I believe we should start, and then the people can join us. What do you think, Father Bucur?
I'm at your disposal.
You're the main character here. We're just supporting you.
I'm not. I'm just the presenter of some interesting stuff, but I leave it up to you entirely to start whenever you feel we should, and to stop whenever you say we should.
Okay. Let's wait 2 more minutes.
Sure.
And bună seara, domnul Suciu, bună seara.
Bună seara, Doamne ajută, Părinte.
Doamne ajută. Okay, so I believe we'll start, and we'll let people join us afterwards. So I will start by saying that I want to welcome everyone to today's conference. Today's conference is part of the Father Calciu lectures. And let's start by saying a prayer, and then we'll get to talk about what we're going to present today. In the name of the Father, of the Son, Holy Spirit, amen. Heavenly King, Comforter, Spirit of truth, who are present everywhere and fulfilling all things, treasure of blessings and sword of life, come abide in us, cleanse us of all stain, and save our souls, O good one. Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy, Lord have mercy. In the name of the Lord, Father, give the blessing.
God is with us, with his grace and love of mankind, always, now, and ever, and unto ages of ages.
I'm Father Ion Stefan from the Holy Cross Orthodox Church. We're part of the Romanian Orthodox Episcopate of America. And it is our pleasure to host today the first conference from the Father Calciu lectures. Next week, we'll be having a second one, as you know. So today, Father Bogdan Bucur is the main person in charge of talking about a great book that it is about to be translated in English. Father Bogdan Bucur was born and raised in Romania. After theological studies in Bucharest, he moved to the United States for graduate studies at Marquette University with now Archbishop Alexander Golitsyn. He has authored 2 academic books and a number of articles in the area of patristics and biblical reception history. He was a priest in Butler, PA, at St. Anthony's, the Great Antiochian Orthodox Church. After 13 years in the Department of Theology at Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, he has recently moved to St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary, where he teaches patristics. And I got to tell you a very interesting story with Father Bucur. He's such a great person. It happened a few years ago when I was a priest in Pittsburgh, parish priest at St. Andrew's in Pittsburgh. On Christmas Day, I was about to fly from Washington, D.C. to Pittsburgh, and sure enough, the flight got canceled. So I was very worried, what am I going to do? The parishioners were waiting in the church to start the services. So Father Bucur graciously offered and saved us that Christmas Day. So I never got to thank you, Father Bucur. So thank you very much. And thank you very much for being here this evening. So without further ado, let's start.
Well, thank you for inviting me. It is the case that we've known each other from Pittsburgh, and I do have very fond memories. not only that time, but mostly when I got to serve with you and with Father Bogdan, your predecessor, because for me this was the Christmas gift. We used to have the service earlier in the Antiochian church where I served, and so on the 25th I would go to the Romanian church, and my annual gift to myself was that I got to serve in Romanian and have fellowship and communion there, a slice of my home country. This evening, I have the pleasure of sharing with you and with anybody willing to to join the Zoom, I guess, something about this amazing figure, Father Nicolae Steinhardt. Many consider him blessed in some fashion. Maybe we cannot canonize him, but we have greatly benefited from his writing, his many writings, in fact, and with the echo, the after effects of his personality. Many of us have fallen in love with the faith of our baptism and reverted, as it were, because on the strength of his witness. I'm a child of the 1980s, so a teenager of the 1990s in Romania. And in a time of great confusion, his voice, his writings, his voice speaking through his writings was very important to me. I love him dearly. And I don't speak here as a specialist on Father Nicolae Steinhardt. I should say this clearly. I'm not a specialist in Father Nicolae Steinhardt, but I'm an amateur in the etymological sense of the word. That is an amateur, a lover, someone who really is grateful that this man existed, that God sent him as a blessing to all of us, and as one who has who owes him a great deal personally, in terms of finding my way back into the church. Father Nicolae is a voice, one of many in a great cloud of confessors, many of which have eventually come to be known in the West. He remains unknown in English-speaking, among the English-speaking Orthodox and English-speaking Christians generally, because his magnum opus, his massive diary of felicity or journal of joy, the book does not really have a title yet in English, although it has been translated into numerous languages. It exists in French, in Italian, in Spanish, in Hungarian, in Ivrit, in Portuguese, now also in German, in Greek. Does not yet have an English translation. And I'm privileged to be part of a group revising a translation for St. Vladimir Seminary Press, which is hopefully going to come out sometime next year. The work is ongoing, and if nothing works tonight, if everything is going to be a big disappointment, at the very least, I will have signaled the fact that this work is coming out. So this is a massive ad for the Journal of Joy in its English translation. I should add, since this is the right place, that the translation and the publication of this English translation, but also the translation itself, that is the revising of an existing translation, which now goes through several revisions. We want to do a careful and a good job, would not be possible without the very generous help that came directly from Archbishop Nathaniel. So if anybody ever makes noises about how the Romanian episcopate is not Romanian enough, you can tell them to be Romanian enough means to do something that is useful in presenting the witness of exemplary Orthodox Christians from those hard years in Romania to the West. And this can't be done by ignoring such a work. To produce this work takes money. And so to be a good Romanian means to put your money where your mouth is. I'm very grateful personally, and we are all, it's in Seminary Press, grateful to the Romanian Episcopate for literally making it possible for us to do this work. So A few words about Father Nicolae now. He is born in 1912 near Bucharest in the little town, suburban area of Pantelimon in the northeast of Bucharest, to a Jewish family. He is Jewish, but he became a Christian. And even though he became a Christian, he never ceased to be Jewish. And this is one of the areas that are fascinating to interrogate ourselves on, about what identity means, whether ethnic identity and religious identity mix in some fashion, and in what way he is Jewish or is a Christian or is both. At any rate, he's born to a well-to-do and well-educated family. I will have a few things to say about his father in particular, who is an extraordinary figure that deserves mentioning. He was highly intelligent, very well-read, unbelievably well-read. He read voraciously everything, and wrote on issues of Christianity and Judaism in the 1930s, published in the Romanian interwar press. He was a literary critic, although his PhD was in constitutional law. He got a PhD in 1936 in constitutional law, but spent his years writing as a literary critic. In 1958, when the so-called lot of the intellectuals was arrested, and I have a few things to say, he became one of the people sought by the prosecution to as a witness against these people. So you have here on this first slide the photo of his arrest, the mugshot. The people that they were trying to jail were chiefly the two here on the left, Constantin Noica and Dinu Pilat. This was the Noica-Pilat lot, also known as the lot of the intellectuals, the lot of the mystically inclined legionnaires, that is the right wing, the Iron Guard folks. It was a concocted charge. These were high-ranking intellectuals. You may be familiar with Pastorel Teodoranu, gifted poet, writer, epigramist, whose fault was that he wrote a little bit too freely about the presence of Russian troops in Romania. He had a very nice little epigram in which it rhymes in Romanian, of course, but in English translation, it would be something along the lines of, they lifted you so high on a pedestal. They had a statue of the Soviet soldier liberating Eastern Europe. And so they had this enormous statue. And he wrote, they lifted up you so high, oh beloved Soviet soldier, not because you have liberated nations, but because your feet are stinking. And so they deemed this to be unacceptable. Pastorel Teodoranu ended up in jail. Sergio Al-George, a very distinguished Indianist, who subsequently published translations of the most important works of Hindu philosophy. Alexandru Paleologum, Constantin Noica, perhaps the chief philosophical thinker of his generation, Dinu Pilat, a novelist who was thrown in jail because the characters in his novel were displaying ideas that the regime found objectionable. Marieta Sadova, a very right-wing intellectual, an actress, very gifted actress, married to a right-wing activist who ended up playing both sides, left and right. She ended up delivering some of the things that the prosecution wanted, but was jailed nonetheless. And there were others also in this lot. What I wanted to show is that these were perhaps the leading intellectuals of their time. In 1958, the regime was growing a bit nervous because following the Hungarian Revolution of 1956, they had figured out that movements start with students and with intellectuals. And so these people had to go in some fashion. So the group was thrown together entirely artificially. Some of these people knew each other. Some of the people did not know each other. Practically, the charge was that Marieta Sadova, the actress, had brought from Paris some works by Eliade and Cioran, some works that were then read in a group of friends and were discussed. Those discussions were deemed to be inimical to the regime, and they were, of course, but, you know, Eliade's piece was a novel. It wasn't anything terribly political. And they counted on Steinhardt being a witness for the prosecution. Because he was Jewish, they couldn't exactly figure out why this Jewish guy was somehow so devoted to the leading right-wing intellectual leader, Nae Ionescu, and why he was friends with all these right-wingers. But they counted on him on delivering some kind of witness that indeed terrible things had been discussed among those people. And that's why they invited him, that was the term, they invited him for a little talk. Now, this invitation turned into a few years. Here you have the, the invitation. You have been invited in order to be heard as a witness, etc., etc., etc. Eventually, the invitation became an arrest, and he was thrown in jail with his friends. At this point, before we go into what he did and what he did not do, let me say a few things about his father. The Journal of Joy has a famous phrase, which nobody managed to forget. His old father, late 70s now, encourages him to go to jail and to not betray his friends. After having been invited for this interrogation, they had told him, you either confirm what we need you to confirm about these accusations, or you're going to go to jail with them. And you should think about this very carefully, because you have an aged father that you're caring for, and you don't want to leave him alone, dying in misery like a dog. So Steinhardt said, well, all right, I need some time to think. As he came back home, his father, who had packed him everything he needed for jail, told him, why are you back? What are you doing here? You gave them the impression that you are hesitant and that there may be a chance for you to betray your friends. But you must under no circumstances accept to be a witness for the prosecution. You will have hard days in jail, but your nights, at night you will have peace. You will sleep well. That is, your conscience will be clear. So stop hesitating, go to prison. I'm heartbroken, but there is no other way. And the famous line that we never forget is, don't be a fearful Jew. Don't shit your pants. And that's how he sends him off to go and do his jail time. Now, everything we're going to read about courage, about dignity, about truth, about bearing witness in Steinhardt owes, I think, to the example of his father. I should say some things about his father. He was, this Jew, Oskar Steinhardt, was a great Romanian. He fought and was decorated during the First World War. He fought at Mărășești, one of the famous battles of the First World War. He was extremely well educated as an engineer in Switzerland, in Zurich, at one of the very prestigious schools there, remains prestigious to this day, the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology. And there he was a classmate of a famous guy you might know as Einstein. On his father's side, he had this connection. On his mother's side, Steinhardt was related to Sigmund Freud. And he actually visited Freud with his mother. This distant uncle was well received, and he has a few things to say about that as well. His father had worked in Austria and Romania until finally he became the director of this lumber factory near Bucharest, where Steinhardt was Nicolae Steinhardt was born and grew up. And the old man remained working even after being dispossessed of everything he had. He continued working until 79 for almost no pay, retired with almost no money. And you can see them. These are photos. This one to the left is a photo taken by the Secret Services. They were under surveillance. Steinhardt was taking care of the old man. The old man was an extraordinarily, how should I put it? An extraordinary man from a moral point of view. The moral fiber he had was unbelievable. As you may know, Steinhardt becomes a Christian in jail. And you might wonder, what did his father say? Well, his father said, I hope you were genuine in your conversion. At any rate, don't think too highly of yourself now. Don't think that you have special access to God and God is going to answer your prayers and do exactly as you wish. Don't forget there are some 3 billion other people. Very humble, very realistic. And this is the man who tells him, never betray your friends. So Steinhardt goes the next morning, is arrested. And what he has to say when he's interrogated about his friends, Noica and Pilat, and Palelog, especially his very, very dear friend, Steinhardt says it is an honor to be accused here for these trumped up causes, and promptly is then delivered to 13 years of prison. He's not going to be there for that long because in 1964 the political prisoners were released under international pressure. There was a general amnesty of political prisoners. Eventually, after his being released, he starts writing this Journal of Joy that we're talking about. The Journal of Joy is confiscated by the secret police. He rewrites it from memory. In fact, it was a 500-some page long manuscript, which he rewrites and makes into a 750-page manuscript. The first one is returned to him after many, many interventions. And he rewrites all kinds of versions in between the two, eventually manages to make copies and disseminate them among friends, some of whom turn out to be informants of the Securitate, others smuggling this manuscript abroad. And in 1989, fragments were read on Radio Free Europe. This was finally published in Romania after the 1989 revolution in 1991. And the book, The Journal of Joy, became, as I said, the book that had a tremendous influence and is now one of the most well-known and influential works, Christian works. Steinhardt was called, because of this book, Romanian Solzhenitsyn. In 1979, I believe, with help from Noica, his good friend, the one that he had gone to jail for, Noica finds his way to the Rohia monastery in the north of Romania, in Maramureș, which at the time was a little isolated skeet. And he lives there for a decade before dying in March of 1989, a few months shy of the toppling of the regime. So he ends his life as a monastic. Although after being released from jail, and we know from the Journal of Joy that he had been betrayed by a love interest he had, who ends up talking for the prosecution, but will also be thrown in jail for a few years. He comes out and he lives a monastic life, really, but ends up a real monk in the monastery there, with the help of an abbot, unafraid to be somewhat creative and give this monk the ability to continue to write, to continue to publish, to continue to attend literary events and so forth while being formed as a monk. What happened between Steinhardt, the Jewish literary critic, and and Steinhardt the monk was jail, prison, a terrible environment, which he describes briefly in the following way. This is the prison of Jilava. Cell 34 is a kind of a long and dark tunnel. It has many of the powerful elements of a nightmare. It's a cave, it's a canal, it's a subterranean intestine. It is cold and deeply hostile. It's a barren mine, an extinct volcano's crater. It's a pretty successful image of a discolored hell. Soot covers everything in a thick, greasy layer of slimy blackness, continuously expanding and sticky. We are shaking with cold, we're overwhelmed with dirt, and we are hungry. And in this almost fancifully unreal and sinister place, I was to know the happiest days of my life. The journal of joy is the journal of his time in prison. It is in prison 3 months after his arrest that he is baptized in quite extraordinary circumstances. And of course, this is the turning point. I should say that in retrospect, he notices, and we learn from him, that he had been looking for something like this for a long time. In fact, if there's anything he worries about when he's arrested, it's not so much his father, though he worries about his father, but his father tells him, don't worry about me. You don't be a fearful Jew. Don't shit your pants, as you've heard. Take care of what you need to take care of. Go with your friends. But he was worried that now he would not be able to be baptized. Still, it is in jail that he is baptized, and it is in jail, in prison, that he lives the happiest days of his life. This is the account of the baptism. 2 of the detainees, accomplices, pass in front of the peephole to block it. The warden could come and look at any moment, but now that the cells are taken on walks or brought back by turns, it's unlikely. So everyone's in the courtyard, yes. Hastily, but with that priestly skill where haste doesn't hamper the clarity of the diction, Father Mina, a Bessarabian, so from today's Republic of Moldova, a Romanian province that was occupied several times by the Tsarist Russia and then later by the Soviet Union. So Father Mina Dobzeu utters the necessary words, marks me with the sign of the cross, pours all the contents of the kettle, a chipped and ugly kettle they had found there, with a sign of the cross, pours the content of the kettle on my head and my shoulder. The cup is a kind of chipped kettle, and baptizes me in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. I'm born again out of wormy water and a swift spirit. We venture back to the bed of one of the Greek Catholic priests, close the bucket and the vat, and there I recite the Orthodox Creed as we had established. I renew the promise not to forget that I was baptized under the seal of ecumenism. Done. Under such circumstances, baptism is perfectly valid without either the immersion or the chrismation. If I survive prison, I'm to present myself for chrismation to a priest whose name Father Mina gives me. I would forget his name and then remember it. Now notice that he wants to be Christian, he wants to be Orthodox, but he wants to be a gentleman, one of the themes of his writings. And when he mentions ecumenism, under the seal of ecumenism, what he means is that after the immersion, he presents himself in front of 2 Roman Catholics and 2 Byzantine Rite Catholic priests and a Protestant pastor to acknowledge their presence, their influence, their contribution by prayers, by advice to what is going on. So he's not Catholic, he's Orthodox, but he is a decent, respectful kind of Orthodox. At the time, especially when the Byzantine, the Greek Catholics were persecuted, I think this is a kind of attitude that speaks differently from the usual propaganda of hatred and black and white portrayal of Orthodox and Catholics. So this is a deliberate gesture. The baptism done in such a way as to be as inclusive, we would say today, as possible, even though without diluting in anything the orthodoxy of his of his decision, or his Orthodox decision. And then with this, we have access to perhaps the major theme, of course, of the Journal of Joy, which is joy. And he speaks about the experience of baptism in ways that are beautiful, but also, how should I put it, come very close to descriptions that are border on the mystical. Those baptized as infants, he writes, cannot know and cannot suspect what baptism means. I find myself assaulted second after second by ever stronger attacks of joy. It is as though with each battering, the attackers reach higher and strike more avidly, more precisely. And so it's true. It's true that baptism is a holy mystery, and that holy mysteries do exist. Otherwise, this happiness that surrounds me, it envelops me, clothes me, defeats me, could not be so unimaginably wondrous and complete. Silence and the sweetness in my mouth, in my veins, in my muscles, and the novelty. I am a new man. Whence has all this freshness and newness come? Revelation is proven true. Behold, I make all things new. And Paul, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. New, but unspeakable. I can't find the right words, just the banal stale words that I have used habitually. As he meditates on his baptism, he has at some point a dream, which perhaps is both a dream and a vision. And I have a short excerpt of it, in which you'll see that joy is something that starts to resemble what you might find in accounts from the saints of the fathers, perhaps in unusual language, but still recognizably. Over and above everything, I'm happy, happy, happy. And I know that I am. And I say to myself, and it's as if the light were brighter than light. And it's as if it spoke to me and told me who it was. It seems to me that the dream lasted long, very long. The joy not only lasts a long time, but also increases. If evil has no bottom, then goodness also has no ceiling. The circle of light grows ever wider, and the joy, after it had enveloped me silkily, suddenly changes its tactics, becomes firm, throws itself, trundles itself upon me like an avalanche that anti-gravitationally lifts me up. And then again, it proceeds otherwise. Tenderly, it cradles me, and in the end, bluntly, it replaces me. I no longer am. No, I am, but so strong that I no longer recognize myself. It's a vision of light. It's a vision of Christ as light. And it is something that sounds to me, at least, very similar to what we read in St. Paul's epistle to the Galatians. When St. Paul says, now that he is in Christ, it is no longer he, but Christ that lives in him. It's an experience of being who you are, but in a new way, as Christified. It is an experience of making baptism real. And it is from this kind of baptism and from these kinds of experiences that a certain lifestyle is fashioned, which is dominated also by joy. For instance, he has the occasion of being seated right next to a terrible anti-Semite, somebody who basically was a professional Jew hater, we would say. And both of them are silent and embarrassed. That guy is embarrassed because he's seated next to this Jew who is a very decent person, and the kinds of things he has said and done would be beyond inappropriate in these circumstances. Steinhardt, on his turn, notices the discomfort of this other person, and so he apologizes to him. I'm sorry, he says, that you have to sit next to a Jew. But, these are the circumstances. And that offers the other person an opportunity to apologize. And they embrace each other. Tears come to their eyes. And we read once again about joy, the joy that comes with forgiving and being forgiven. We were suddenly flooded by this sensation of ineffable felicity, by comparison with which any alcohol, any erotism, any delicious dishes, any journey, any reading, any accomplishment, any exam, and nothing but ashes and dust, illusion, emptiness, desert, waves of joy pouring on us, flowing, flooding us, submerging us. Both of them have this extraordinary experience, which in the case of Steinhardt is simply a working out of his baptism on an ethical level. Let's put it this way. And he understands Christianity in this way, as being Christified, being replaced, as it were, and at the same time confirmed as who you are, but in this new divine mode, a kind of mystical transformation, perfectly understandable since we're talking about the mystery of baptism, but with a very precise and very clear ethical cash out, if you want to put it. Joy is at the center of an ethics of thoughtfulness, of kindness, of benevolence and courage, and all these things I will try to explain. But at any rate, for him, Christianity is, of course, dogma, mysticism, morality, it's everything, all of these things. But it is especially a way of life and a solution and a recipe for happiness. Notice that he's mentioned earlier, nothing really earthly, no earthly joy compares to the kind of joy that he's talking about. And now he says it's ultra LSD. Next to Christian doctrine, its demands and results, all the drugs and hallucinogens, folk cures, Hahnemann delusions, what do you call this? Those super diluted voodoo medicine things. I forgot the name of it, but it'll come back to me. All of this is nothing. LSD is nothing, drugs are nothing, accomplishments, satisfactions, anything earthly can't compare with the kind of joy that he understands Christianity to deliver. And as I said, this has concrete implications for day-to-day life. He observes the people in the cell. These are people who are not used to living in those kinds of circumstances. These are people usually brought up in family of some wealth, very well educated, very fine people, people who speak a number of languages, people who teach and are being taught, and who transform prison in a sort of university, and who are now thrown and reduced to being treated like animals. But the people in the cell are kind, he writes, all of them, and polite. And we don't take it tragically, but remain gracious with each other, cheery, as only in prison people can be. I don't know, how cheery can you be under those circumstances? And then he adds a prefiguration of monastic hesychasm or of heavenly bliss. So prison for him is the incubator of a kind of life that will eventually find its flourishing in his monastic vocation. Christianity grants peace, quiet, and rest, not tasteless and monotonous, but by way of the most reckless adventure, ceaseless struggle, and the riskiest of acrobatics, a trapeze on high and no net beneath. Hesychia, happiness, and not only in certain places on the sacred mountain, no, everywhere, a universal recipe. So there you have it. This is Steinhardt's entry into the experience that we consider, right, mystical, if you want to use that word, but which he says is open to any baptized and is not the province of monasticism alone, but, as he says, a universal recipe. In his case, it will eventually overlap with the environment of the monastery, with its strictness and with its routines and so forth. But it is something that he finds is simply the Christian way of being. You notice in the way in which he phrases things that he is highly original. He is one of many witnesses, a cloud of witnesses, of course, but he's original because he talks differently. Who would have compared the joy of Christianity, the satisfaction of Christianity, with drugs? Who would speak about Christianity as peace and at the same time the riskiest adventure, a sort of dynamic rest? This is actually an insight that goes back to St. Maximus the Confessor, and to Gregory of Nyssa, and to Origen, and so forth, and to St. Paul. But it is phrased in this new and fresh way. And speaking of fresh way of experiencing things, what I found particularly beautiful and interesting about Steinhardt is the way in which he talks to us about Christ. It's not the inquisitor that interests him, and it's not the inquisitor with whom we fall in love. It's not the accountant and the god of rules, but to use Steinhardt's words, the aristocrat. He has this peculiar way of speaking about a kind of spiritual aristocracy. I qualify this as spiritual, but he simply says aristocracy, and he then explains himself. So here's the quotation. "It may be a total blasphemy, but I have my own theory, according to which Christ in the Gospels bears all the traits of a nobleman. Look, he stands by the door and knocks. He is discreet. He trusts people. He is not suspicious. And trust is the chief quality of the nobleman. He doesn't verify. He's not like an accountant, right? He forgives easily and wholly. With the devil, the accountant devil, there is no room for the smallest erasure. But Christ, all of a sudden, erases an entire registry of sins. Christ, the nobleman, forgives everything. Christ not only forgives, but also forgets. And once forgiven, you are no longer the slave of sin and son of a servant. You are free and friend of the Lord." And he's always careful and polite and obsessively careful on this point. "Friend," he says to Judas, "never an insult or a disdainful word to the sinner." And he keeps on giving out of his wealth nobly, more than he ought to. Contrast this with Judas' administrative care for the money wasted on chrism, which shows partly that the betrayer was lacking in the sense of generosity, and on the other hand, that the Lord naturally and nobly passed over any calculation or avarice. If this is the portrayal of Christ, which means the icon of God, right? If this is how God is, as revealed in Christ, then of course this is the blueprint for a Christian morality, which expresses itself in the same ways: generosity, trust, discretion, kindness, being polite for Steinhardt is important. And coming from Eastern Europe, coming from Romania, I think I can say something about this, that sometimes we do think that you can be orthodox and mystical and at the same time boorish, as Romanians put it, mitocan. Well, there is a great incompatibility between the two. And Steinhardt emphasizes this. So how is a Christian then? And he speaks about the Christian and the Christian faith as marked by freedom, by joy, by happiness, by kindness. So here are some quotes that describe the Christian for him. I've spoken about joy, and so just to say here, if the person is intolerant or sullen or agitated or sad or upset, he's not a Christian, no matter how faithful to virtue. The Christian is free, hence happy. If we focus on the good news of being freed from death, from mortality, and destined for the resurrection, if the tomb of Christ is empty, then there is a ground for happiness that that beats anything. It's easy for me to say it, and I realize this sounds so superficial. What exactly were my challenges? But this comes, consider this comes from somebody who's conceiving this thought in that hell of a prison. Another trait, kindness and discernment. Fundamentalist fanaticism of any kind is repugnant and feels daft to me. The monk zealously employing fundamentalist fanaticism is only masquerading as a Christian and is an Orthodox estranged from the faith he is supposedly professing and witnessing. Our faith has always been known for its steadfastness, yes, but also for its distaste towards anything that is not grounded in kindness and our forefathers' discernment. I think this is perhaps especially timely, since all the stress of the pandemic have sometimes given rise to attitudes that I think we can very well question whether they are really the voice of orthodoxy or not. In line of what Steinhardt has to say, I would very much doubt that the kind of aggressive fanaticism, the kind of ultimative voice that condemns left and right and pronounces this one and that one not quite orthodox. This isn't something that is recognizably orthodox. If orthodoxy is that which Steinhardt presents, I would embrace Steinhardt. And finally, he says, I think the sins committed in all the brothels of Paris, Hamburg, and Singapore, in all the place of perdition and all the ports and metropolises of the world, these do not cry more dissonantly and woefully to the heavens than the insults, the sudden arguments, the gratuitous insults uttered with vitriolic hatred by the quarrelsome and the morose. This is the kind of appeal, the kind of call for the aristocratic behavior of generous and well-disposed and polite way of practicing Christianity. To reach the heights of Christian mysticism, you have to start somewhere. Maybe start with rejecting the kind of hatred and vitriol of the quarrelsome and the morose. And faith is also free for Steinhardt. He has a way of phrasing it that I think still has the potential to scandalize today. He says, you know, the 2 and 2 is 4. It can be true, it's mathematically true, but it can be also a big lie. Because when people right next to you are being sawn in two, the phrase 2 and 2 is 4 can be a lie. 2 and 2 is 4. If you want it to be true, then 2 and 2 is 4 means you must scream at the top of your lungs. It is an injustice crying out to heaven that people should be sawn in two. What he meant by this was you can't utter banal truths within a context that is outrageous. And he was speaking specifically about 1950s Romania, where you have, for instance, Gheorge Călinescu, the last name I'm mentioning here, an eminent literary critic who had embraced the new reality, the new regime. He had changed his contribution to a daily paper from Chronicles, I forgot. He was now turning into an optimist. He was writing Chronicles of Optimism about the new regime and its accomplishments. And he was delivering great lectures at the university. At the same time, however, his colleagues were in prison. And so Steinhardt says, you know, your lectures about the life and works of Eminescu, wonderful as they are frivolous. And they're a lie. You can't say your little 2 and 2 is 4. Eminescu was a great writer, because the truth that you're trying to obscure and the lie that you're putting forward is that you're hiding this. People are in jail. People are being sawn in two. He also is not very happy with Father Dumitru Stăniloae's articles when Steinhardt comes out of jail, he is given the task of writing about Catholicism under the Habsburgs in Transylvania, the abuses committed by them, and how the undoing of the Unia is a great accomplishment. Now, I'm personally of the opinion that well, it's difficult to judge somebody who's been in jail. It's very hard to pass judgment. But when somebody who is in jail passes judgment in this way and says, well, to write about the abuses committed by Catholicism on the Habsburg, to write about, you know, the Unia being imposed by the Austrians, and in a way, the undoing of this in 1948 in Romania, when the Unionists were returned forcibly to Orthodoxy as a sort of solution to that injustice, is indecent, is frivolous and indecent. And it is a form of lie in that it is formally true. It is like 2 and 2 is 4, but it forgets that all these people are now in jail. All those Greek Catholic bishops are in jail. There is general misery and suffering, and an abuse does not right another older abuse. And really, the issues of the day are not what happened 200 years earlier. The issues of the day are people are being sawn into right next to you. Same later on, and this is quite interesting. When Romania passes all kinds of laws making divorce difficult, outlawing abortion, and basically throwing in jail doctors, anyone connected with abortions. This 1966 or 7, I believe. What does Steinhardt have to say? He says, there are priests who make haste with fiery words of praise in approving the moral measures taken by the government, the totalitarian government, the abolition of prostitution, the prohibition of abortion, complicating divorce. But they have in mind, I believe, more the letter and the severities rather than the spirit in which such measures are grounded. For the spirit can't blow except where there is freedom and where virtue issues from free will. And they forget the terror and the lie that is cast upon the nation, and they leave behind the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness. And in other words, he says, yes, of course, abortion is a terrible sin. And so prohibiting abortion is good. Divorce is a tragic reality. So complicating it, giving a chance for marriages to work is in principle a good thing. Abolishing prostitution, yes, you're reining in vice, but don't forget why they're doing this. This is a totalitarian regime which wants to control everything, including your reproductive life. That's what you should not leave out. And so if you try to abstract these laws from their framework and forget the intention and forget the great truth, the great terror, the lie, and only focus on little details, you're not really bearing a Christian witness. The problem here is freedom and lack of freedom, persecution, terror, totalitarianism. This is the truth that you're not, that you can't speak. And that's the thing. Whenever you speak the truth, for him, the true truth is not that of 2 and 2 is 4. Nobody's bothered by this. The true truth is that which offends the powerful, is that which is hidden, the truth that is forbidden. And with this kind of discernment, which is, I think, very orthodox, in fact, of course, he has the potential to scandalize, but I hope you see the spirit in which he's writing this. At any rate, the point here is that Christian faith must be free and protect freedom, because true virtue can only grow on the soil of freedom. You can't have morality mandated, especially imposed by decree. Another issue where I think he's quite original, and again, perhaps has the potential to scandalize some, is that faith is not stupid. At some point, he says, it is inappropriate for the church, the bride of God, for the Christian, the bride of God, to be stupid. And he says, it sets my teeth on edge when I see how Christianity is confused with stupidity, with a kind of cowardly and stupid piety, a bondieuserie. This is a French word coming from bon Dieu, the good Lord, way of referring to God. So a kind of piety centering on sweetly saccharine references to God, to the good Lord. As if the point of Christianity were only to allow that the world be mocked by the forces of evil, and as if Christianity were condemned to blindness and paralysis, so as to make it easier for lawlessness. Nowhere and never did Christ ask us to be stupid. He calls us to be good, tender, honest, humble-hearted, but not idiots. The Lord loves purity, not imbecility. I love naivete, says Leon Daudet, but not in the bearded ones. That is the mature men, right? It is fitting for the bearded to be wise. Let us and them keep in mind how oftentimes greater ill comes from stupidity than from evil. No, it would be too easy for the servants of the devil, I mean for the Schmecker. I don't quite know how to render this in English. The people who are conning everyone and who make their way by abusing other people, like conning by abusing left and right. It would be too easy for the servants of the devil, for these Schmecker, if we were stupid fools. God, among other things, commands us to be intelligent. For the one who is blessed with the gift of understanding, stupidity is a sin. At least from a certain point onwards, stupidity becomes a sin, the sin of weakness and of laziness, and of the non-use of your talents. So this, of course, you can react to it and say, oh, wait a second, he's been inappropriate and not very PC. Yes, he is not very, what to do with people who are not gifted with some intelligence. That's not the point, of course, here. The point is, the truth is, way too many intellectuals, way too many people who could understand, refused to understand. People who saw and knew refuse to see and to know and to speak out. So that's what he's saying. I didn't know the answer of those who are told about torture, about concentration camps, about prisons, about mental asylums, political in terms of mental asylums. I didn't know is not a valid excuse. No one is obligated to invent gunpowder or to discover quantum theory. On the other hand, though, an elementary smartness is a duty, especially for a Christian who must always be on the watch against temptation. And stupidity is a temptation. Stupidity in the sense here, let me interject, in the sense of willful making yourself stupid, pretending you don't understand. It's not very clear for you. Stupidity is a temptation. Not only for the Christian, of course, this is because of an objective experimental observation. No one knows anything, but everyone knows everything. Ignorance, idiotization, the blind passage through life and through things, the indifferent passing are from the devil. And this is a harsh indictment of the kind of life we were forced to live in totalitarian systems. It applies as well to right-wing totalitarianism, but since we lived 50 years in most of Eastern Europe and 70 some in Russia, of the totalitarian regime coming from communism, it's that what he has in mind. The pretense that things are okay, that somehow it's not quite so bad. No. Passing blindly through life means passing indifferently to the suffering of your neighbor. And he says, this is from the devil. It sounds harsh until you consider the biblical, the New Testament pattern for how else to do it. What's the alternative? Well, the Samaritan. He says, the Samaritan wasn't only good, but attentive. He knew how to see. Notice that the priest, the Levite, they pass by, they see, but they don't see. They see, but they don't care, right? They don't know how to see. But the Samaritan is intelligent in the sense that he apprehends the truth of the matter. There is somebody close to dying, and he needs to care for him. How else could people have known that the Lord is hungry and thirsty, a stranger, sick, imprisoned? Remember Matthew 25. How could the people have known this to be able to feed him, to give him drink, to welcome him, to clothe him, to visit him, if they had not paid attention? So the virtue that is praised is not only that of actually doing these things. Whoever has clothed the naked and given food to the hungry and visited in prison, so forth, has clothed and visited and fed the Lord himself. But how could they have done all of this? Well, they did it because they paid attention. How could they pay attention? Because they were there. They were intelligent. They knew how to see. That's what he means by intelligence. It's not IQ that qualifies it. It's something else. It's the heart. But it's not only emotionalism. It's the kind of thing that he has seen in his father, in Oscar Steinhardt, who knows and sees all of this and tells him, you need to know with whom to stand. Go and stand with your friends, even if it means standing in prison. You need to do that rather than pretend everything is all right with the world. And yes, they did say something that was against the regime. They ask you to sign a very simple statement. They did speak against the regime, but consider the greater framework. What is this regime? What is this evil? What did they say? Where is freedom? Aside from this, he speaks after a visit with Elder Cleopa. He speaks also about Christianity as rational, humble, and discerning. And he speaks about what Father Cleopa told him about temptations from the right and from the left, as it were. He says, we all know the temptation from the left. I'm putting mental quotation marks here. The temptations from the left, it belongs to the passions, the vices, evil. We all know that. But there's also the temptation from the right, which is more surprising. It comes out of virtues and qualities, out of the desire to do good, self-satisfied piety, the good that is imposed by force. God is up in heaven and all's well with the world. I'm graced, what do I care? I'll go nibble on my bone in my corner. Moralizing, saccharine writings, morality that condemns. And we can also fall through this. But we should never be certain. We should live dangerously, he says. That's kind of a strange thing to live dangerously. At any rate, he has some interesting words to say about how Christianity must be practical. He says, when the neighbor's house is on fire, I don't stop to pray and improve myself. I call the firemen and I run to the fountain. If not, I'd be arrogant and wouldn't really love my neighbor. He brings a story about a group of monks experimenting a blackout while they're at prayer. And one of the monks goes to the fuse box to fix the problems, but everybody else is praying for the light to return. The story as he receives it is that, the monks who prayed were the truly pious. But he says, no, on the contrary, they are falsely pious. They're shamelessly tempting God. Would they wish for Christ himself to descend from heaven with the fuse? So there you have the kind of very practical things that are also implied in Steinhardt. He speaks a great deal about Romanian and good Romanians, a dispute that had started in the 1930s with Ionescu. Being a Jew and being a Jew that converted to Christianity gives him a very interesting perspective on this topic, but I won't go into it because I've already gone overboard with time. And I would rather close with something that I find extraordinarily beautiful, namely that Christian faith, if genuine, should be generous in assessing everything outside church. In other words, you don't have to buy everything, but you have to look for that which is good. You have to be generous. And here's perhaps unexpected for a monastic stuff he liked: pop music. He says pop music, of course, does not rise to the same transcendental height as classical music. But still, in the sporadic sigh of the historical and existential man, man's gaze is raised, even though furtively and infrequently, towards the skies. For example, in the music of Bob Dylan, whom he describes as a poet, a singer, and a legendary character, or Leonard Cohen, or the Beatles, or Louis Armstrong. He says, if any mortal is to blow the trumpet at the last judgment, he will surely be the one. And the height of this kind of super generous assessment is his exegesis. It's a real exegesis of Jesus Christ Superstar, the rock pop opera. He's listening to it very, very carefully. This is 1971. He's listening to it several times. And then he writes effusively about the meeting between Mary Magdalene and Jesus, where Mary Magdalene's character speaks to Jesus the night before the arrest and says, "Rest now, don't worry about us, don't worry about anything." He has a whole interpretation of this. I find it very interesting, but as I say, it's getting too late. If you want, we can perhaps play the video, and I'll read what Steinhardt has to say about this. But let me close by skipping the Jesus Christ Superstar thing and say that I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak about Steinhardt, not only to advertise the fact that we will soon have the English translation of this book, and perhaps also an English translation of some of his sermons, but to have had the opportunity to speak about Steinhardt, period. It gives me great joy. I believe that Steinhardt's sobering, powerful, vital, and very insightful comments on the scriptures, on Christian life, his witness to Christianity, are both a delight and a much needed spiritual diet, especially perhaps these days. I can only hope that some of his words and some of his attitudes and some of his spirit will be of use to us, to some of us or to all of us, hopefully, in our ascent into God. I thank you very much for your patience, and I'm looking forward to perhaps have a little chat about this and a bit Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Bucur. We appreciate your great presentation. This was really great, and we learned a lot from you. I do have some questions, but I would like to give somebody else the opportunity to ask questions. And we have a comment earlier. Mr. Surinder Gan has a suggestion for Schmecker. Could be a wise guy in a cheap street mart sense. I would say politician is also a good English word that would translate Schmecker.
Wise guy, yeah.
But if anyone has questions, please ask. You can unmute yourself and you can ask the question. Okay, I'll go ahead and ask a question that was actually asked by a friend of mine. He's an interpreter. He translates books from Romanian English. And he asked, I'm not sure if you have the answer for this, but the question was, why did you guys decide to go for Journal of Joy instead of Journal of Happiness, which would be a more accurate, translation of Hezekiah? But also, he suggests that happiness would be a better word that would, sell the book better to the American public, because it has beyond the Orthodox, meaning. It has some sort of hedonistic meaning that sounds good for your general, public. So do you have an answer for this?
Not quite. The fact is, I think that the title will be the last thing that will change, the last moving piece. After everything is set, we have the introductory study by Dr. Svan Porum from Cambridge. We have the footnotes that are ever expanding as we go through it again. And we will have the completed translation. And after we have the thing typeset, I think we will still toy with the title, because the fact is we are wondering about whether to call it the Diary of Felicity, the Diary of Happiness, the Journal of Happiness, Felicity, or Journal of Joy. I think for now we have Journal of Joy simply because of how it rolls off your tongue, Journal of Joy. But there isn't much there. I mean, I'm completely in agreement with the comment. We don't quite have a way of speaking of the kind of happiness that Steinhardt is speaking about, the stuff I've presented, and at the same time conveys in a way that has market appeal. So therein lies the problem. I think, in fact, it's a problem of the public, because we have perhaps lost track of the kind of happiness experience in conditions of imprisonment. We would say, no, they were not very happy, which is true on one level, but he says the journal of his experience of Christ is one of joy, and it started at the time of greatest misery. So it's deeply paradoxical. We'll figure it out eventually. I mean, it'll be an imperfect title, but we'll do our best. So I'll take this into account.
If I may add something, if you don't mind, I don't know if you can hear me. I was listening to some conferences by Mother Alexandra recently, which have been posted online, and something very interesting that she was saying there says happiness is an illusion. What we are striving for is joy. So that would be like in favor of basically supporting joy, because that's closer to the spiritual idea of happiness.
Well, it's an issue of rendering into today's English a concept that reflects a spiritual reality to which few of us want to have access. It's the same with the Beatitudes. Blessed are the persecuted, happy are the persecuted, joyful are the persecuted. However you want to do it. But why are the martyrs happy? Why does the church proclaim them blessed, for instance? The persecuted for righteousness' sake. I don't know how to render it. I mean, it's in the end a conventional thing, whether we decide joy means that as opposed to happiness. I'm afraid this fluctuates with cultural ages and trends in our culture. Anyway, next year we will have to make a decision for this generation, and if the work is well received and has an afterlife, maybe 20 years from now we'll change the title. I don't quite know what to say. It's true. We're in a tough spot here. All right, there is an interesting comment from Father David. The Journal of Ultra LSD. Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. Is it possible to get baptized for a second time as an adult? It is possible, but it is bad. I mean, everything is possible, but baptism is baptism. And all the blessings that flow from baptism don't need a second baptism to be triggered. They just need us to live out that one baptism that we have received. I'm assuming we're talking about a Christian baptism, right?
Yes, thank you. That's my question. Thank you. But by how it was described, as a Baptist, as an adult, and what the experience it was, and we don't remember, or at least I don't remember the experience when I was baptized as an infant. It's almost like, a temptation to
It's
practice
true.
God.
I would recommend to you, I'm looking for the book here. There's a very, very dense, that is very, very difficult but beautiful book written by St. Nicholas Cavasilas in English translation, The Life in Christ. And in this book, he talks about the mysteries of the church: baptism, chrismation, Eucharist. Most of the time we experience them either as children or we're not really paying attention. I mean, for a good many years, we keep receiving communion without paying too much attention to it. And everyone's focused on the mechanics of it. Have you eaten before? Have you not eaten? Stuff like this. You have to do it, you do it all the time, and so forth. Baptism and chrismation, usually, if they happen in our childhood, we don't remember. But they do produce the fruit if we renew them in our lives, not by renewing the ritual, by living them out. Baptism produces illumination. Chrismation produces the perfecting of our faith. And the Eucharist produces union. These are the three stages of purification, illumination, union, the three stages of the mystical ascent in one of the classical articulations. And the mysteries, the rituals, and the sacraments give us the seeds for those things. So there is no need to repeat the form. Just as in a marriage, is it necessary to be married every time we quarrel with each other and then make up? I mean, we don't need that. The baptism is renewed with every confession. The baptism is renewed with every act of taking it seriously. Just as our marriage is renewed every time we decide that that the vow we have spoken, the love we have decided on, that path is more important than our particular set of passions at a particular time. And so there is no need for a second baptism. It's possible, but it's not what the church does. It's in fact, it's more than frowned upon. I don't know how to put it. It's a bad thing. I have visited the Rohia monastery, and I'm so pleased to learn more about this holy man who lived there. Yes, indeed. Did he have followers that he particularly mentored? Yes, there were a number of people that visited him. But remember, first of all, that Rohia was quite isolated, a small place. It's grown in the meantime. He was tasked with, in fact, he made a deal with the abbot. They needed somebody who work as a librarian and to sort through and catalog their 20-some thousand volumes. And so Steinhardt said, "Oh, I know the right person." And for a year or so, he pretended to be looking for someone. And then he says, "Father, I found the right person, and he's going to do it for free." What? Who is that? I am the one. And in exchange for it, please just take me in as a monastic. So they had him as a monk. His obedience was the library. And within a decade of being there, right before his death, the library was in good place. Now, during this time, he did meet with a number of people, some of whom reported him to the secret police. There was a meeting in which he had friends over in the early 70s, 71, 70, what am I saying here? 71, 72, not as a monk, but then later in 1983, 84, people visiting him at the monastery, close friends, people interested in literature and religion and so forth. And he shows them in his drawer the second edition, the rewritten version of his Journal of Joy, Diary of Happiness, however you want to put it, of blessedness. The next day, he's visited by the secret police. We want to read that too. It gets confiscated. And he realizes the only explanation for this was that somebody must have reported him. But he has interviews that were recorded and that were published subsequently by Father Ioan Pintea, by Zacharias St. Georgian, by others. so he made disciples in this sense. He had many friends, very devoted friends, and these friends are also disciples, people who began in the same way, but who started to look at him differently now that he had entered monasticism. For instance, the Vlad and Sanda Stolojan from Paris. I don't know of discipleship in the strict monastic sense, because he was such an awkward kind of monk, if you want. There is also the fact that he was constantly under surveillance, even there, and every time he spoke, they had to tell him to just keep it not only simple for the peasants, but also without allusions to the regime. So when he preached, for instance, about Elijah, and spoke about Ahab and Jezebel, he preached in such a way that it was pretty clear he was talking about Nicolae and Elena Ceausescu. When he talked about iconoclasm, it became very clear, and in fact, he said explicitly, the church has sometimes been cowardly in relation to the state authorities. And he gives the example of Byzantium for an example in which the powerful, the army, the magistrates, the men generally have all the power, and the women and the monastics have no power, but they are the ones to prevail. That's where the church was, even though institutionally, of course, the structures, the power were on the other side. So when he spoke in this way, it was very clear that this was a dangerous person. So there weren't many to flock to him, and many were not allowed. So I don't personally know of many followers, but then take this with a grain of salt. As I said, I'm really not a specialist in Steinhardt.
I would like to add that he didn't have an easy life in the monastery either. And there are many accounts where the secret police would pay someone to go in front of his room and play some music. So there are many accounts where, he would write, and they would literally put up what do you call that? They're no longer in existence, cassette player. So they would play the music in front of his room. So and there's a lot of harassment. You mentioned, the Securitate stealing his, seizing his book many times. Ion Carayon was one of the people that we found out that
the source that kept informing. It's a very, very strange source. Arthur was his signature. And clearly, this is somebody intelligent enough to understand what Steinhardt is about, and who gives opinions and has, it's a very lively kind of informant, but clearly somebody who morally is, very lacking in precisely those things of which Steinhardt is writing. Someone who understands everything at the same time misses everything, somehow manages to. But difficult to pass judgment from our younger generation and from comfortably being seated here, in my case, in New York. However, some things are really disappointing.
Father Bucur, is there a plan to have an introductory note to explain the social and political context of 1970 and 80 Romania? Because I'm afraid a lot of the people reading this book in America would consider Ceausescu a Christian hero because he blocked, he banned the abortion, when in fact banning the abortion wasn't for, appreciating the life given by God to each child, but rather, conserving the machines that they were supposed to work in his factory, in Ceausescu's factory, because he envisioned humans like machines who would build a socialism and communism. So is there a plan to translate not only the language, the Romanian language, but also the social context and the political context?
The footnotes will be quite extensive, not only because Steinhardt has so many references to works, to authors, to all kinds of things in a very creative way. So sometimes you have to footnote all kinds of things, but also to explain, as you say, the context in which this makes sense. I would quote something that I haven't had on the PowerPoint. He says, sometimes the devil asks you to sign a true statement. He says, look, 2 and 2 is 4. Sign here that you agree that 2 and 2 is 4. What's scandalous about this? I'm just asking you to say with me 2 and 2 is 4. And Steinhardt's answer is, I'm not signing. I'm not signing even if 2 and 2 is 4, because this is the devil's work. You're giving me, and who knows what you're doing with this. So say with me, life is sacred, abortion is bad. Wait, who says it? Why? When? What is the nuance? What's the context? What's your agenda? And that's the thing. He has this very fine discernment that allows him to pinpoint the exact problem. This is about robbing people of their dignity and of their freedom, of creating little robots for the party. This is not about life, and this is not about Christian virtue, and it is enforced in a way that tells you exactly all you need to know about the totalitarian nature of this. So this is his position at the time when the church was more or less complicit with it. And as he says, many priests, even notable ones and important ones, saying, "Well, look, they're doing something right." And Steinhardt's reaction is, "No, you are being taken advantage of. No, we are not on the same page. We're not going to sign 2 and 2 is 4. But again, Steinhardt is strange, a strange figure. Not a question, but an observation. The episode you just relayed to us about being sold out by a visitor shows him as someone who lived what he preached, namely acting in accordance with his understanding of Christ, the aristocrat, generous and trusting towards all, including the person who only came to him to give him the kiss of Judas. Yes, but with nuance. And I'll go back to Steinhardt's father, to Oskar. So Oskar Steinhardt tells him, be courageous, be dignified. Friends are friends. You don't betray friends, no matter what. They're extraordinary people. It's an honor for you to be there. That's what he says at the trial. It's an honor for me to be with my friends. You will have terrible days. It'll be terribly hard, but you will sleep well at night. Your conscience will be clear. And then he says, hey, from a practical point of view, don't be stupid. Do you think that after you sign what they want you to sign, they won't find some reason to nab you 6 months later and you'll end up in jail, but with all the compromise? So go now, don't be stupid. This is just to say that being kind, being trustworthy, trusting, being aristocratic in that sense, does not exclude being sharp, being clear-eyed, seeing through things. And Steinhardt loves the verse in the gospel that says, be ye pure as doves and wise, cunning as serpents. And he finds ways of navigating these treacherous waters, knowing what and to whom and when to say, whom to avoid and whom to keep close. Of course, it doesn't always work, but he does not like being naive. That's what I meant earlier, this kind of naivete that doesn't really care. So it's true that if he errs on the side of generosity, on the side of trusting, but not without trying, at least, to make it hard for the regime. And he says, yes, of course, we pray for Nero. We pray for all rulers. But to pray for them doesn't mean to be excited about this, to be enthusiastic, to be happy, genuinely happy, or to fake happiness until you're convinced, because you've been brainwashed into the fact, to be convinced of the fact that the ruler is good. No, you pray for them, but they're terrible. And so you welcome people, but Judas is always part of the group. So that's just a little nuance to what you said. Fundamentally, I agree, but just to add a nuance. what is the plan for the distribution of the book once it comes out? How will people know about it? How can they buy it? Well, we're going to make a lot of noise. The press has its, of course, its network and its advertising machine, but we are planning book launches more or less simultaneously in New York, in London, and in Bucharest. In New York because of the press, and wherever we can have the opportunity to do it. In the UK because of the Orthodox Institute in Cambridge, where the Dr. Porum, who signs the introductory study and the footnotes, works, and where there is a good community. This is not only for America, this is for all English-speaking readers. And in Bucharest, for obvious reasons. I hope we will be able to sell the book in Australia, in Canada, in the United States, in the United Kingdom, in Ireland, and in Romania. We will very likely have Mr. Andrei Pleșu deliver the Schmemann lecture of next year, 2020, January 23. At least that's the plan. Maybe I should not have shared this, but anyway, if that's coming true as we wish, then we'll try to somehow advertise it big time. Every possibility we have. Of course, through the Romanian Episcopate and the Romanian Metropolia, the two Romanian bodies that we have in the United States, we're going to try to reach Romanians wherever they find themselves, as well as non-Romanians, of course, because this is chiefly for English readers, but many will have heard about Steinhardt from Romanian friends, co-workers, co-worshippers. So any suggestions are welcome. At this stage, we're just trying to get through this material.
Now that it's translated in English, probably Romanians will finally read it, because the name, I wouldn't be amazed if a lot of people, would associate a foreign name with the book being in English, and not knowing that Steinhardt was Romanian, in fact, will be interested to read this, as it happens with other books. I want to extend our invitation, if you guys want to launch the book in the Washington, D.C. area. Our church can host this event, so please consider this an invitation. And for the team, I'm not sure exactly who is on the team who will be advertising the book, but consider this an invitation. I know Father Steinhardt was very fond of Father Calciu. He quotes numerous times Father Calciu, and he's a stature and option of pretty much bullying the communist interrogator in Securitate and standing, tall whenever he was interviewed or interrogated, I should say. So there's many references. He loved Father Calciu. So, and I was about to mention that I should have opened with this, that this year we celebrate 15 years since Father Calciu fell asleep in the Lord. So for us having this conference and talking about the Journal of Joy was a real blessing. So I would like to ask if we have more questions. Go ahead. And Father Bucur is just recovering from COVID. He mentioned earlier, so you probably heard it in his voice. So I don't want to over solicit him with our questions, but please feel free to ask a question if you have one.
Father Jon, if I may make a suggestion.
Sure.
Before we close, if there are no more questions, or after I will have answered the question that will show up, I would like to read you this passage. It's a short passage, Steinhardt's exegesis of that passage, of that fragment from Jesus Christ Superstar. Just to, if anyone's scandalized, let them be scandalized for good. And if anyone has enjoyed it, let them enjoy it even more. All right. Questions going once, going twice.
Father Subu saying that you have their support as well from Falls Church VA. There are sister church and Falls Church VA. So yeah, you'll have a lot of support in this area.
As soon as we have the book, I'm serious. We will take you up on your offer, and love to have something in.
And not only that, but keep in mind that I introduced you to Mr. Vidrashko and the Vidrashko family earlier. His father baptized Father Steinhardt, was the godfather, because
yes,
Father Mina Dobze was the actual, the priest doing the baptism, but Mr. Emanuel Vidrashko was the godfather. Mr. Vidrashko, do you want to tell us anything about your recollection of your father being in prison with Father Steinhardt, or anything that we can get from the book, or do you want to add anything? We can't hear you. And then we'll let Father Bucur.
Yes. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. So I will tell a few words about Father Nicolae. The first time I met Father Nicolae was in 1964 when I was a college student. And he and my father, Emanuel Vidrashko, had just been released from prison during that year, blanket amnesty for political prisoners. They had been convicted, as you know, politically of an imaginary guilt as enemies of the socialist regime of Romania. Both of them were part of a group of 23 people convicted during a political trial of the so-called unadaptable intellectuals, as you say there. And ironically, many of them had never met each other prior to the trial. As you said before, the leaders of the group were Constantin Noica, philosopher, and Dinu Pilat, literary critic and writer. In prison, as you know, Nicolae Steinhardt decided to convert from Judaism to the Christian Orthodox faith, and the baptism was performed on March 15, 1960 at Jilava prison by Father Mina. My father, who had met Father Nicolae for the first time in prison, was the godfather, the layman. The unusual baptism was described in detail, as you presented very well in the Journal of Joy. Both Father Nicolae and my father were well-educated, refined intellectuals. So Father Nicolae had specialized in world literature and philosophy, and my father in the ancient Greek and Latin languages and literature, and in Roman law. Father Nicolae was a very smart and positive person with a high sense of humor. Both kept meeting frequently. I remember that every year on December 6th, we were celebrating St. Nicholas at our house with small amounts of food served ceremoniously. The political police, Securitate, did not stop to monitor both of them. My father was often contacted by a Securitate operative who wanted to know the whereabouts of Father Nicolae. My father would let his friend about it, and together they would decide what to tell. Father Nicolae was also aware that he was being monitored or surveyed at Rohia Monastery. Even after Father Nicolae died in the spring of 1989, the Securitate operative kept asking my father if he was in possession of a journal from his friend. Exasperated, my father replied, "Why won't you stop harassing his soul even after he left this world? What did he do to you to hate a saintly man so much?" And, I recommend for the whole picture of this political trial, there is a book written by Stelian Tănase, the second edition in 2003 called Anatomy of Deception, or in Romanian, Anatomia Mystificării. It's a very, very interesting book with a lot of pictures, not the picture, a lot of documents, including those pictures presented by Father Bucur, where there are pictures of almost all 23 people there. And it has a lot of details, both before and after 1964, with the survival people there, their families, their spouses, kids. It's very, very interesting, and I recommend to you, if you have a chance to see it, to read it. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Pedrashvili.
You're welcome.
So now, Father Bucur, without any further ado, we're waiting for your
It's not. This is
la pièce de résistance.
Right. So Jesus Christ Superstar is an interesting, but kind of cheesy, I think we would say now, Broadway kind of pop opera. I personally like it very much, but it's also cheesy, but it's also something that you can't get rid of. And sometimes it captures the characters very well. Not the Jesus part, usually the baddies, because we know how to do those and we understand them much better. Well, in this Jesus Christ Superstar musical, there's a scene with Mary Magdalene trying to soothe Jesus' anxiety, pain, and so forth. And that's what he's writing about. So, 1971, listening in stereo, which is pretty unusual for the time, listening in stereo to the entire rock pop opera Jesus Christ Superstar by Andrew Lloyd Webber and Tim Rice. Mary Magdalene's character, the text, the role, the voice, the interpretation is extraordinary. She sees Christ, suspects his immense pain, foresees his fate, understands that it has to do with sacrifice. And she only knows one thing: to console the persecuted innocent. In the text of the rock pop opera, which paraphrases the gospel text, she says to him, "Don't think about us, don't think anymore, rest at peace. All shall be well, let the earth spin by itself tonight." He's actually quoting from the libretto to the opera. She dares lead him on with warm words and lies to Christ. The mother's love for her child, all shall be well, sleep, don't worry, don't you bother yourself with us. Mary Magdalene's example and how the rock pop opera brings her to life means for us that we don't have to slip into abstractions and generalizations, thinking of the poor who aren't present and who constitute a simple mental category, or to put another way, an alibi. That it becomes us to comfort Christ, meaning the present one, the one who suffers before us and who waits now here for our compassion. It's not bad to want the good of humankind and of the poor and of the working class, but it's easy. It's harder to carry the paralyzed detainee who might be faking it on your shoulder to the bucket. It's harder to hand the bedpan to his operated man who can't get out of bed and who might be exaggerating a bit. Or to endure General Constantinescu Țăranu's snores, the greatest snorer of all times in all prisons. The sound he used to produce was so triumphant, irresistible, and ferocious that there was never any question of being able to sleep in the same room as him, without waking him from his sleep and demanding threateningly that he lie on his side. And it wouldn't be impossible for him, really, but still, to care for this jerk who urinates in the canteen. We should help this person through deeds, now as we can, if only with a kind word, a consolation, an attentive ear, a gift, a rub down, a walk to the drugstore. This person, not those who aren't present. Not clean abstractions and categories, far away, discreet and full of qualities, who don't snore loudly and don't urinate in the canteen. To help our neighbor full of wounds and sins, out of ugly and reeking wounds, of disgusting and petty sins, a fault finder, the one full of manias, the insolent one, thankless, ungrateful, filthy, stubborn, pretentious, the one for whom nothing is good enough, and who answers to the good done to him, if not with swear words, then at least with digs, ires, and resentments. I think 3 creatures sprinkled the cross of Christ with a little dew: Mary Magdalene, the good thief, and before them Nicodemus, who showed the Lord that the good seed would be able to yield fruit even in the compact ranks of stubborn duplicity. 3 creatures and Mary's tears. And I think, well, there you have somebody who can find beauty and truth and echoes of the gospel. Really, this is maybe reading too much into this poor Jesus Christ superstar, but I think it's a fundamental and very traditional way of reading the world around us as Christians. The fathers of the 2nd and 3rd centuries did the same when they received and baptized Greek philosophy and Roman jurisprudence and everything they could, and found how shall I put it, pieces, shards of the Logos sprinkled all over, and directing everything towards that same goal that Christianity embodies whole. So I find this not only remarkable, and at times quite funny, because really it's sometimes perhaps exaggerated, but a good recipe for us today. We tend to be turning into more Manichaean kind of Christians, black and white, yes, with us, against us, inside, outside, whereas this is an invitation to be more subtle, to be more generous, to be, I think, more Christ-like. So I hope that Steinhardt will become a name that we can refer to and learn from in years to come.
He's certainly a Trojan horse that would, serve the cause of Romanian Orthodoxy, because he's an Orthodox gentleman. Instead of focusing on the ethnic mantra, he will probably be an easy read for the American public. Thank you very much again, Father Bucur. It was great to listen to your presentation today. I want to thank again our Archbishop, His Eminence Nathaniel, who gave the blessings for this conference to happen. Our Bishop Andrei, who is a big supporter of our church and the Father Calciu lectures. I would like to thank as well our President, Mr. Traian Antonescu, Parish Council President, who is actually our best IT person in the house. So usually the presidents are very ineffective at the parish council. In this case, we have a very modern type of president who's actually carrying on his shoulders most of the IT work and a lot of he's very active on all our social media projects. I want to remind you guys that next week, next Saturday, December 18th, we'll be having the second lecture, the second conference. Mr. Mihail Neamțu will be conferencing in from Romania. It is a Zoom conference. Mr. Neamțu will be having a discussion and a presentation on the theology of Dostoevsky. The conference will be in Romanian. For the ones who do not know who Mr. Neamțu is, he's a very active Christian thinker. He has a PhD in theology from University in England. And he's very active public figure, very active on social media, on Romanian media and television. So I invite you to attend that conference as well next week. Again, it is in Romanian. And the reason we had today's conference in English, it only made sense to have it in English because we're talking about the translation of. I know some of my parishioners did not attend, but we will be, saving this online. It is Sunday, and we acknowledge that a lot of people have, a lot of, they schedule activities in advance. Kids go to hockey, go to soccer. So thank you everyone who attended. We have the recording online on YouTube on our channel. So if you want to review anything, it was a great presentation. I knew that Father Bucur will be, having the best presentation ever, and happened that he mentioned that he's not very prepared, or he just wanted to stay more humble, but it was extraordinarily good.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I wish you all the best, and I'm glad to have been part of the lectures.
And you were talking about serving liturgy on Christmas at a Romanian church. So
Yes.
if you want to get your present this year, we invite you to serve with us in Alexandria, Virginia.
I'd love to. I'm afraid that won't work. I mean, I'm scheduled here.
I know. Well, thank you very much, everyone. God bless you. And we'll see you